Hello, here I am again in the name of the sovereign creator of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. Last video I stopped short at verse 5 in chapter 10. We'll now pick it up at verse 6. I already read it. I'm now just going to comment on it. We have here 3 gerunds: demolishing sophistries. I did that already. Taking captive every thought. I've also discussed that. Now we come to being ready to punish. I have to confess that I'm not quite sure what to do with that one. In the immediate context, Paul is talking about he is ready to punish any act of disobedience on their part and whatnot and so on, because he talks about whenever your obedience is complete. So that is the precondition for his punishing every act of disobedience. Just how this applies today, I'm not quite sure. The problem, of course, is the prior condition of the obedience. So who is supposed to be being obedient? Would it be the church or a local congregation in order for me to be able to do this and so on? I'm just not sure how that works today. The first two, demolishing sophistries and taking every thought captive, those work. Those we can do. Okay, now beginning at verse 7, I'll read through 11. From here on, Paul is going to get personal. He's going to be defending himself quite a bit. We'll just have to take it the way it is. I'll read verses 7 through 11. Do you only look at the face of things? If anyone has persuaded himself that he is Christ's, let him consider this again within himself, that just as he is Christ's, so also we are Christ's. Now, even if I boast a little to excess about our authority, start parentheses, which the Lord gave us for building up, not to tear down, or not to tear you down, close parentheses, I will not act ashamed, so as not to appear to agree that it is only with letters that I terrify you, because some say, oh, his letters are heavy and forceful, but his physical presence is weak, and his speech can be disdained. Let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters, while absent, is just what we will be in action when present. There's not really all that much here. He is starting now to answer certain people who apparently have been criticizing him and downgrading him and so on and such. So they are being disdainful while his physical presence is weak, while his speech is so on and such. The one thing I just want to comment on is at the end of verse 8. He's not going to act ashamed, he says. What I understand here is that he is not going to pretend to be ashamed of having overdone the boasting in that event, since his greater concern here is to cut the ground out from under his critics. Well, that's what he's going to be doing. Some people are saying, when he's a long way away, his letters are heavy, but when he's here by himself, present, well, Paul says, hey, just wait until I get there. Let's read now verses 12. I'll read verses 12 through 17, which as a matter of fact will end verse 10. Okay, now we do not dare to class or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves with themselves, are without understanding. We, however, will not boast beyond proper limits, but will stay within the boundaries that God assigned to us, a field that includes you. For we are not overextending ourselves as though we had not reached you, because we did indeed get to you with the gospel of Christ. Nor do we boast off limits in the labors of others, but we have hope that as your faith grows, our boundaries will be greatly expanded through you, so as to evangelize the regions beyond you. Open parentheses, not to boast in work already done in someone else's field, close parentheses. He who boasts, let him boast in the Lord, because it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but whom the Lord commends. Verse 12 gives us an important truth, fact. If you compare yourself with a weakling, you can tell yourself that you are strong, which, however, could get you beaten up. It depends. If you're going to compare yourself, it depends on who you or what you are comparing yourself to. And if you choose the wrong object to compare, you could get in trouble. We should not be doing that. In any case, our standard is the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. You find that in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 13. So this business of comparing yourself with other people, that's not smart. No, that's not a way to go. We need to compare ourselves to God, His standards, what He wants. Now he talks about boasting beyond what he has the right to boast about. His assigned boundaries. He talks about boundaries that God assigned. That's an interesting concept. Like God says, okay, this here is your field. This is where you're supposed to be working. So you just stay right here. And of course, in Paul's case, that included the Corinthians because he was the one who took the gospel there, way back when. As he says, and the first time he spent 1 year and 6 months there, but he has obviously been there again. He's mentioned that he had a second visit somewhere along the line. So he says, at least you guys are within my field. Fair enough. But verse 15 here talks and 16. We have an interesting business about increasing the boundaries, like extending the boundaries, taking in more area. He says, we have hope that as your faith grows, our boundaries will be greatly expanded through you so as to evangelize the regions beyond you. Very good. So who is going to do the actual evangelizing? The Corinthians. Presumably not Paul himself. He's not even there. So, what he is saying is that their work will contribute to his boundaries. Well, you know, that's the way it works, doesn't it? I would say, like, as my spiritual children pass on my teaching, they are increasing the area that my teaching has reached. Okay? Doesn't that make sense? Right? Increases the area. More and more, bigger and bigger. Not to boast in work already done by somebody else in someone else's field. In verse 17, he quotes from Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 24. He who boasts, let him boast in the Lord. Right, very good. Because, verse 18, it's not, if you just commend yourself, that's not going to hack it. That isn't what's going to do it. It's whom the Lord commends. Let me say something else here that may not have been clear to you. Just because God uses or blesses someone does not necessarily mean that He is approving of them. You may have never heard about God's desperation. And may He forgive me for using that expression, but the point I'm trying to make is that when you try to look at things from God's point of view, what does He have to work with down here? Like really. Reminds me of the parable in Matthew chapter 20. The vineyard owner, he goes out at 6 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock, 12 noon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And when he goes out at 5 o'clock, he says to the people, he says, how come you have been here the whole day? So how did he know they were there the whole day? Because he had seen them. And they were so bad that he himself did not want them. But as for some reason he had to get his crop in that day, and as his level of desperation increases, he is contracting guys that he didn't want before, you see. At 6 in the morning, he only got the best ones. Then at 9 o'clock, so on and so on. As his desperation increased, he gets less and less demanding as to the quality of his workers. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, these are guys that spent the night drinking, whatever. Well, God uses just all sorts of rather interesting people from time to time. And just because God uses someone does not necessarily mean that he is actually approving them. That's a whole different story. Whom the Lord commends. And there are requisites for that. Okay, going on now to chapter 11. Mercy sakes, chapter 11. I will now read verses 1 through 4. I could wish that you would put up with a little of my foolishness, but indeed you already are. For I am jealous over you with a godly jealousy, because I determined to present you to Christ, parentheses, a single husband, close parentheses, as a pure virgin. But I am afraid that somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve with his cunning, so your minds may be corrupted from the integrity that is in Christ. For if someone comes and preaches another Jesus, whom we did not preach, or you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you easily put up with it. I'm going to start with that last statement. You easily put up with it. The impression one gets is that the Corinthian believers were lacking in discernment, or commitment, or maybe both. He says, I want to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. It's the idea of a marriage. Of course, as you know, the church is the bride of the Lamb, bride of Christ. But there was the serpent back there in the garden that deceived Eve with his cunning, and that serpent is still around. Satan is still very much alive and well in the planet Earth, and he is still in the business of corrupting people's thoughts, their minds. Notice that here in verse 3, at the so your minds may be corrupted, that verb is in the passive voice. Someone is doing the corrupting. And since it is corrupting away from the integrity that is in Christ, it's Satan or his servants who are doing that, Satan directly or indirectly. And he is corrupting their thinking. That's the way that Satan usually starts. He starts by getting us to think wrongly. If you go back to Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7, you'll see that that is a very serious problem. In verse 4, he's almost being sarcastic. Anyone can come along, preach something else, and you guys take it. No way. Not to be. Going on, verses 5 through 9. Now, I consider that I am not at all inferior to the very best apostles. Though I may not be a trained speaker, I do have knowledge. But we have been fully manifested to you in all things. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted? And did I proclaim God's gospel to you free of charge? I robbed other congregations, receiving support from them so as to serve you. And when I was with you and in need, I did not burden anyone, because the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. Yes, I kept myself from being a burden to you in anything. Sorry, I didn't read that right. Yes, I kept myself from being a burden to you in anything. And we'll keep on. There's really not much to comment on there, except he raises the possibility that maybe he made a mistake in preaching to them without charge. That's what his point is, I proclaimed God's gospel to you free of charge. End of verse 7. He received help from other places, but he did not charge them, although he might have, he could have. He had the right to do so. He's going to come back to that later, I believe, and with more details, so I'll leave it at that for the moment. I would say, though, that that could be a mistake, because he did not teach them how to give. That's part of God's economy, all right? We've already seen that in chapter 9. So, avoiding the subject of money or giving is not really a good strategy if you are dealing with people, because that's part of what that's part of what life is all about. Okay, going on, I will read verses 10 through 15. The truth of Christ is in me. This boasting will not be silenced in me in the regions of Achaia. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows. Further, I will keep on doing what I do in order to cut off the opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things of which they boast. Such men are really false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no wonder, because Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. So it is no great thing if his servants also masquerade as ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. We may find it a little bit difficult to understand Paul here, or maybe even want to agree with him always, but we need to be fair in dealing with him, because you have to see what he is doing here. He's just not merely boasting or puffing himself up or whatnot or who not. His problem is that he is cutting the ground out from under these other guys who are in fact false apostles, deceitful workers and whatnot. Why? What's the problem? I would say that the problem is not Paul's personal feelings. That's not what it's all about. The problem is that they are selling falsehood. They are teaching falsehood. They are teaching things that are not true. They are deceiving the believers. They are misleading them. They are causing damage to the flock. That is the problem. That's what Paul is combating. And so that's why he is not backing down from what he is. He is an apostle. And as a matter of fact, God was pleased to manifest his power through Paul in rather astonishing ways now and again. When he was in Ephesus, people would bring pieces of cloth and he would bless the cloth and it would go back and they would heal people. It's the only record we have of that happening that I know of. Well, of course, that's pretty big. That's not a small something. So he's not backing down as to his own qualifications, because, as he says, it's God's grace, it's God's power, it's not him. So he's really worried about these guys who present themselves as apostles and so on, but as a matter of fact, they're fakes. They are deceitful workers. As a matter of fact, they are Satan's servants. He's quite clear of that. Verse 15, this is no great thing if his servants also masquerade as ministers of righteousness. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. Dear people, we need to remember that neither Satan nor his servants are in the habit of appearing with horns and tails. Just because that's the picture people make of Satan, horns, tails, hoofs. That is not the way Satan presents himself. He presents himself as an angel of light. And his servants too. They're not going to say, hey, I've got horns, I've got a tail. No. They come across like they are good, they are great, they're the best thing around. They are faking it. They are masquerading. While I'm on that subject, there have always been people around who want to get on the bandwagon, who want a free ride. There are always those who traffic in spiritual things for personal or temporal advantage. We see it all the time in the churches, so-called ministries, on and on. But since such people only do damage, that's what Paul is really wanting to expose them. He's worried about the Corinthians' welfare. Just because someone looks good does not mean that someone really is good. You've got to have discernment. You've got to analyze. Just because, Satan comes across like an angel of light. His servants come across like the real thing. You've got to analyze carefully. You can't just swallow everything that comes along. Whose end will be according to their works. They may be getting away with it down here, but they are not going to get away with it before God, the just judge of heaven and earth. At that time, they're going to get their just deserts.